The Department of Defense is starting to have a hard time keeping their story straight, as we've seen recent reports and statements as it pertains to multiple UFO investigations begin to spill out into the public. We've recently seen the release of two major reports out of the DOD, one out of the Office of the Inspector General. Inspectors General are focused on investigating the allegations of criminal behavior within a department, in this case the DOD, and another report, a historical records review report, out of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, which was a new office dedicated to the study of UAP in our current environment that was mandated by Congress to do a historical review of the US government's involvement in the UFO topic all the way back to 1945. As a quick recap, this is the state of play that we are currently dealing with, where we see the legislative branch accusing the executive branch of withholding information as it pertains to alleged UFO programs and materials, where the allegation states that the executive branch is using special access programs to coordinate with government contractors on the capture, retrieval, and reverse engineering of UFO materials. And within that set of allegations, we see this breakdown of what the actual whistleblowers are accusing the executive branch of doing in this context. Now, the DOD IG report that was released at the end of January explains in detail the lack of comprehensive response plan that currently exists within the DOD, including the exclusion of combatant commands, which are all of the military personnel that are on the front lines in various geographic regions across the globe. And the reason that this report was so interesting is it was originally released in a classified version in August of 2023, in the middle of when AARO was doing their historical records review. And this report clearly states the DOD does not actually have a comprehensive and centralized data repository or process to deal with what are ongoing UAP incursions, not only domestically, but globally. The report included 11 recommendations for various components within the DOD, including the Air Force, the Navy, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, among others, so that they could create a centralized UAP reporting system to better understand the scale and the scope of the problem. Now, interestingly enough, the Liberation Times reached out to the Pentagon press office in January to ask how many of those 11 recommendations had been implemented, as the classified version of this report was already released as of August of 2023. In response, the Pentagon SPOC stated that only one of the 11 recommendations was implemented. This is interesting because in May of 2023, the Joint Staff Homeland Division, J3, released an updated statement for all of their combatants to update their reporting mechanisms for UAP specifically, requiring a 96-hour reporting time window and explicitly defining what they mean by UAP, which has been one of the challenges in this story, is there is not a shared definition. But if you look at the text of this definition, we are explicitly talking about things that do not have a known origin of a prosaic nature. While all this is happening between the Joint Staff message and the DOD IG evaluation, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, was completing its historical record report that was released in March of this year. Now, this report has caused a lot of waves in the press, as AARO made definitive statements about the US government's lack of knowledge or possession of any material of non-human origin. The report itself is actually really fascinating in terms of creating a timeline of many of these programs that have previously been denied by the US government to exist. But as you can imagine, there was a lot of interesting contradictions, not only within the report itself, but contradictions with other statements coming out of the Department of Defense directly. Again, one side of the DOD is saying we actually don't have the data and information centralized in a way that we can look at all of it, and AARO is saying we looked at everything and there's nothing there. Both of these things can't be true. The major challenges to the AARO Historical Records Review Report are not only is it in direct contradiction with the conclusions of the DOD IG's evaluation, which was done during the same time period as the historical review report, it was also in direct contradiction to the joint staff message that was sent out by the Homeland Division, both offices with higher levels of access or higher up in the hierarchy within the DOD and executive branch infrastructure than the AARO office. It also was just riddled with very basic errors or mistakes around simple things like the state from which the Senate Majority Leader was from, Harry Reid, dates and names of programs, as well as referencing fandom pages in their citations. Many of the issues in the AARO report were broken down in excruciating detail by former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, in the debrief earlier this week. It's a great article that goes into a lot of detail for those who really want to understand what the report missed out on. And you can also take a look at a breakdown we did of all three of these, the IG evaluation, the AARO report, and the joint staff message, on our white paper at UAP Caucus, which also links out to the original reports for all three. And this has all been unfolding with the backdrop of the recent breaking news from the war zone about a weeks-long incursion over Langley Air Force Base that occurred in December of 2023, in which multiple unmanned aerial systems that could not be identified in varying numbers and sizes were routinely flying over the base to such a degree that they had to bring in specialty assets to try to help with the identification process. This was not yet known by the public until the War Zone released their article on March 15th, which led to a public hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee on April 16th with leaders of the likes of the Air Force and the Pentagon to try to understand and assess what exactly is happening and why don't they have an explanation. That Senate Armed Services Committee hearing happened on Tuesday and was followed by a classified briefing for the House Oversight Committee by the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the same office that produced that Historical Records Review report. And the conclusion from both senators and members of the House is that we are not getting a straight answer from the DOD, not only about the current incursions, but also about the history of the U.S. government's involvement in this subject.